Circus family vanishes in 1992. 10 years later, a cop's son discovers a clue. Tyler Williams felt his heart race as he flipped through the yellow documents he'd just found in the dusty attic of his father's house. At 16, he'd always been curious, but this discovery stirred something deep inside him. Golden Star Circus, Cold Case, 1992. He read quietly, eyeing the folder hidden among his father's old work reports. His dad, Detective Richard Williams, had retired early 3 years ago due to health issues and had never mentioned this particular case. What puzzled Tyler was this: why, among so many solved cases, was this one marked as closed? Inside the folder, he found faded photos of a smiling family posing in front of a colorful circus tent. A strong man with a mustache, an elegant woman with dark hair, 2 boys who looked between 8 and 12, and a little girl around 5. They all wore bright, colorful performance outfits, their expressions full of genuine joy. A handwritten note on the back of one photo caught his eye. Johnson family, vanished without a trace, March 15, 1992. Tyler felt a tightness in his chest. He'd been born in 1986, so when this happened, he was only 6 and living with his parents in Rochester, outside New York City. But something about that family touched him in an inexplicable way. He kept digging through the documents and found statements from neighbors, circus staff, and even other performers who'd worked in the area. They all told the same story. On the night of March 14, 1992, the Johnson family simply disappeared, leaving behind their trailers, performance equipment, and even cash. What intrigued Tyler most was a letter attached to the documents, handwritten on plain paper. "Don't look for us. We're fine, but we can't stay. What happened is too painful to explain. Please take care of the circus for us. One day maybe we can tell the truth." The letter was signed only as the Johnson family. Tyler came down from the attic with the folder under his arm, determined to confront his father. He found Richard on the back porch sipping his afternoon coffee and watching the garden that Tyler's mother, Mrs. Barbara, tended with such care. "Dad, can I talk to you about something?" Tyler approached, holding the folder. Richard looked up, and when he saw what his son was carrying, his expression changed completely. His face stiffened, and he set the cup down with a slight tremble in his hands. "Where did you find that, Tyler?" "In the attic, Dad. I was looking for some old school things, and what happened to this family? Why was the case closed?" Richard sighed heavily and rubbed his face. At 58, his hair had already gone gray, and the lines on his face spoke of decades of hard work. "Son, some cases are better left in the past. That family, they had their reasons for leaving." "But Dad, they just vanished. What do you mean they had reasons? And why did you never talk about it?" "Tyler, listen to me. Let this go. Some truths are too heavy to carry." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. His father's evasive answer only fueled Tyler's curiosity. That night, while his parents slept, he returned to the attic and studied every document more carefully. He discovered that the Golden Star Circus had been located on a plot of land on the outskirts of Rochester, near the highway leading to New York City. In his father's notes, Tyler found an address and decided that the next day, which was Saturday, he would take the bus and go there to see what remained of the place. The bus ride lasted almost an hour. Tyler watched the landscape gradually shift from the urban center to more rural areas. When he got off at the designated stop, he walked down a dirt road until he spotted a lot surrounded by a rusted wire fence. The place was unrecognizable. What must have once been the main ring was now just a plot overgrown with tall weeds. A few old trailers were scattered around, their paint peeling and windows broken. Tyler managed to enter through a hole in the fence and walked through what was left of the Golden Star Circus. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Young man, what are you doing here?" Tyler turned and saw a woman around 70 years old, her white hair tied in a bun, wearing a simple cotton dress. She watched him with curiosity but no hostility. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was researching the circus that used to be here. Did you know the family who worked here?" The woman approached slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. "I did, son. I've lived in that little pink house across the road for over 40 years. I saw this circus grow and I saw it end just like that. Can you tell me what happened? My name is Tyler. I'm Mrs. Margaret. And you, young man, why do you want to know about the Johnsons? It's been a long time since anyone asked about them. Tyler hesitated for a moment but decided to be honest. My father was a detective and investigated their disappearance. I found the documents and got curious. Did the family really vanish without an explanation? Mrs. Margaret sighed and looked around the abandoned lot. They didn't vanish, son. They ran away. But not from criminals or the police. They ran from a truth that was tearing the family apart from the inside. What truth, Mrs. Margaret? Do you have time for a sad story, Tyler? Tyler nodded, and Mrs. Margaret invited him to sit on a rock near one of the abandoned trailers. The Johnson family arrived here in 1988. Mr. Robert was a hard-working man, strong as an ox. Mrs. Susan was the most elegant woman I've ever seen step foot on this ground. The boys, Jason and Brian, were sharp as tacks, and little Emma. Oh, that girl was the light in everyone's eyes. Mrs. Margaret paused, and Tyler noticed her eyes filling with tears. Their circus was different from the others that passed through here. They weren't just performers, they were a real family. Robert did strength acts, Susan was a trapeze artist, the boys juggled, and little Emma, she was the child clown. A sweetheart, dancing and making everyone laugh. What happened to them, Mrs. Margaret? In January 1992, Emma started stumbling more, getting hurt during performances. At first, everyone thought it was just a kid thing, you know. But over time, it became clear something was wrong with her vision. Tyler felt his heart tighten. A child with vision problems in a family that relied on circus acts requiring precision and coordination. Her parents took her to doctors here in Rochester, then in New York City. The diagnosis was devastating. The girl was losing her sight rapidly and would soon be completely blind. And that destroyed the family. Not in the way you're thinking, Tyler. The problem wasn't Emma's disability. The problem was how each family member reacted to the news. Mrs. Margaret stood and walked to the blue trailer, which was less deteriorated than the others. Robert wanted the family to stay together, to adapt the performances to include Emma despite her disability. He said love was more important than the perfection of the show. And the mother? Susan panicked. She thought life in the circus would be too cruel for a blind child. She wanted Emma to be given up for adoption, to a family that could give her a normal life with special education and everything. Tyler felt a lump in his throat. He could imagine the pain of that family being torn apart by an impossible decision. The older boys were divided. Jason supported his father. Brian thought his mother was right. The argument started happening every night after the shows. I could hear the shouting from my house. And little Emma, did she know about all this? That's the saddest part, Tyler. The girl knew she was losing her sight, but she didn't understand why the family was fighting. She just wanted to keep making people laugh. Mrs. Margaret sat back down and continued her story with a shaky voice. In February 1992, Susan made a drastic decision. While Robert was traveling to book shows in other cities, she reached out to a couple of teachers in New York City who wanted to adopt a child. She gave Emma away without telling anyone. Tyler's eyes widened. She gave her own daughter up for adoption without telling her husband? When Robert came back and found out, it was like lightning had struck the circus. I've never seen a man suffer so much. He wanted to go after his daughter, but Susan had already taken care of all the paperwork. The adoption was practically finalized. So they decided to disappear? Not exactly. What happened was worse. The family fell apart. Robert couldn't even look at Susan anymore. Jason was furious with his mother and left home to try and find his sister. Brian was confused, not knowing whose side to take. Susan sank into deep depression. Mrs. Margaret stood up again and walked to a part of the property where the remains of the main ring could still be seen. On March 14, 1992, they gave their last performance. I was there in the audience. It was the saddest thing I've ever seen. Robert could barely do his strength acts. Susan cried during her trapeze routine. The boys tried to keep the crowd entertained, but you could feel they were shattered. And after that show, they disappeared. Not together, Tyler. That's the truth your father uncovered, the one that shook him so deeply. In the early hours of the 15th, each member of the family went their separate ways. Tyler felt he was about to discover something that would change everything. Robert left a letter saying he was going to look for Emma and would only return with her. Jason went with him. Susan packed her things and left with Brian for her sister's house in Pennsylvania. They all left separately, carrying the guilt and pain of having let their family fall apart. But Mrs. Margaret, what about the letter they left saying they were fine? Oh, my dear, that letter was written by Susan before she left. She didn't want anyone searching for them and finding out the truth about what they'd done to Emma. It was a way to protect everyone from more suffering. Tyler stayed silent for a few minutes, processing everything he'd heard. The story was far more complex and painful than he'd imagined. Mrs. Margaret, do you know what happened to them afterward? Did anyone ever find Emma? I know some things, yes. Over the years, I've pieced together information. Do you really want to know the whole truth? Yes, ma'am, I need to know. Then come with me to my house. I have some things to show you. Mrs. Margaret's house was simple but cozy, with a small living room decorated with old photos and well-tended plants. She asked Tyler to sit on the crocheted couch while she went to fetch a shoebox from her bedroom. Ever since the Johnson family left, I've never been able to get them out of my mind. Over the years, I've gathered information almost like a hobby. Perhaps because I never had children of my own, they became important to me. Mrs. Margaret opened the box and showed newspaper clippings, letters, and even some photos. In 1994, 2 years after they left, I received a letter from Jason. Remember him, the eldest son who supported his father? Tyler nodded, and Mrs. Margaret handed him a handwritten letter on plain paper. Mrs. Margaret, you were always kind to us. I wanted to let you know we found Emma. She's doing well, living with a family of teachers in New York City and learning Braille. We managed to visit her a few times, but she doesn't recognize us anymore. Her adoptive parents are good people and she seems happy. My father still hasn't come to terms with everything, but at least we know our sister is safe. One day, when she's older, maybe we can explain it all. Jason Johnson. They found their sister? They did, but imagine the pain. The girl was only 5 when she was given up for adoption. By 7, when her brothers located her, she'd already adapted to her new family and barely remembered life at the circus. Tyler felt his eyes well up. The story was becoming more and more touching. And the mother, Susan? What about the other son? Brian completely distanced himself from his father and brother. He stayed with his mother in Pennsylvania and even changed his last name to avoid being associated with the circus. Susan never forgave herself for what she did. Mrs. Margaret showed another newspaper clipping, dated 1996. This one is Susan's obituary. She passed away at 42, a victim of complications from severe depression she could never overcome. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Tyler read the obituary in silence. The brief lines described Susan Johnson as a woman who bravely fought an illness that slowly consumed her, leaving behind 2 sons and an ex-husband. After Susan died, Brian went looking for his father and brother again. That's how he learned more details about what happened to all of them. Did the family manage to reunite? Partly, yes. Robert was never the same after everything that happened. He and Jason tried to rebuild their lives away from the circus. Robert found work as a construction worker in a small town outside New York City. Jason studied and became a mechanic. Mrs. Margaret showed a more recent photo from 1998. This was taken when Brian found his father and brother. See how much they've changed. Tyler studied the image. Robert, who in the circus photos had looked strong and imposing, now appeared older, with slumped shoulders and a weary expression. His 2 sons stood beside him, grown men, but the marks of suffering were visible on all their faces. And Emma? Did they stay in touch with her? That's the most beautiful part of the story, Tyler. In 2000, when Emma turned 13, her adoptive parents felt she was mature enough to learn the truth about her origins. Mrs. Margaret pulled out a more recent letter from the box dated 2001. This letter was written by Emma herself and sent to me. I don't know how she got my address, but I believe it was through one of her brothers. Tyler read the letter with growing attention. Mrs. Margaret, my name is Emma, but now I go by Taylor. My brothers Jason and Brian told me you knew my Circus family. I wanted to thank you for keeping their memories alive all these years. I know my birth parents made difficult decisions out of love, even if it tore them apart. I don't hold any anger toward anyone. My adoptive parents gave me a good life and taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. I'm learning music and want to teach children with special needs. One day I'd like to visit the place where I was born. With love, Emma Taylor. Did she come here? Yes, she did, in 2002. It was one of the most emotional days of my life. A beautiful young woman, with dark hair like her mother's but her father's determination. Even though she was blind, she walked all over the circus grounds, touching the abandoned trailers, trying to feel the memories she couldn't see. Tyler pictured the scene and felt his heart tighten. And did she find her father and brothers? She did. They came here the same day. It was a difficult reunion, full of tears, but also forgiveness. Robert apologized 1,000 times for not fighting harder for her. Emma said she understood he'd done what he could in an impossible situation. Wow. What an incredible story, Mrs. Margaret. But tell me something. Why was my father so shaken by this case? Why did he close the investigation? Mrs. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Your father, Tyler, was the one who arranged Emma's adoption. Tyler's eyes widened. What do you mean? When Susan sought help to give her daughter up for adoption, it was your father who guided her on how to do it as safely as possible for the child. Richard knew a couple of teachers who wanted to adopt and helped connect the two families. Tyler felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. My father helped tear the family apart. No, my dear. Your father helped protect a child. At the time, the situation was very tense. Susan was desperate and threatened to do terrible things if she couldn't give her daughter to a family who could care for her better. Richard did what he thought was right. He made sure Emma went to a loving, responsible family. But why did he never tell me? Because carrying that kind of responsibility isn't easy, Tyler. Your father always wondered if he'd made the right decision. When he learned the family had fallen apart because of the adoption, he felt guilty, even though he knew he'd saved the girl's life. Tyler fell silent for a long time, processing everything. Finally, he understood why his father had reacted so intensely when he saw the documents. Mrs. Margaret, do you think my father would want to know how the story ended? That the family reunited and everyone forgave each other? I think so, my dear. I think it would bring him great relief. Tyler spent the rest of the afternoon talking with Mrs. Margaret, who shared more details about the time the circus operated on the grounds. She showed him old photos of performances, told him about the other performers who worked with the Johnson family, and described life in that small circus community. As dusk fell, Tyler said goodbye and promised to visit again. On the drive home, he reflected on everything he'd learned. When he arrived, he found his parents watching TV in the living room. Richard looked up as his son entered, and Tyler saw the worry in his father's eyes. Dad, can we talk? Richard turned off the TV, and Mrs. Barbara, sensing the seriousness of the moment, quietly slipped into the kitchen. Tyler, where were you today? I went to the old Golden Star Circus grounds, Dad. I spoke with a woman who lived nearby, and she told me the whole story. Richard lowered his head, and Tyler noticed his father's hands trembling slightly. Son, Dad, I know you helped arrange Emma's adoption. I also know you feel guilty about the family's separation. Richard looked up, surprised. Mrs. Margaret told me everything. But Dad, you need to know how the story ended. Tyler told his father about the family's reunion, how Emma had grown up happy and fulfilled, how they'd all forgiven each other and built a new way of being a family. When he finished speaking, Richard's eyes were filled with tears. My son, you can't imagine the weight I've carried all these years. I always wondered if I had destroyed a family by helping with that adoption. You saved a child, Dad. And in the end, the family found their way back together. In a different way, but with so much love. Richard hugged his son tightly. Thank you for seeking the truth, Tyler. Thank you for giving me this peace. That night, Richard slept soundly for the first time in years. 2 weeks later, Tyler returned to the circus grounds with his parents. Mrs. Margaret welcomed them warmly and prepared coffee for everyone. Richard and the older woman talked at length about the years that followed the case, and the former detective finally made peace with his past. Mrs. Margaret, does the Johnson family still keep in touch with you? Asked Mrs. Barbara. They do. In fact, I have news. Emma is coming here next week with her husband and their little girl. She married a special education teacher, and they have a beautiful 4-year-old daughter. Tyler felt his heart race. Do you think they'd like to meet my father? After all, he was part of their story. I'm sure they would, dear. Emma always said she wanted to thank everyone in person who helped make her life possible. A week later, Tyler and Richard returned to the circus grounds. This time, they found a small crowd gathered there. Robert, now 65, was thinner and his hair completely grey, but his eyes shone with joy. Jason and Brian, both in their 30s, chatted animatedly while watching a little girl run around the grounds. And there was Emma. At 25, she had grown into a beautiful, determined woman. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and she wore sunglasses, but her smile lit up the whole place. Beside her, a tall, kind man held her hand tenderly. When Mrs. Margaret introduced Richard as the officer who had helped with her adoption, Emma was moved. Mr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. You helped me find a family that gave me everything I needed to become who I am today. Richard was visibly touched. Emma, I always wondered if I did the right thing. Seeing you here, happy and fulfilled, answers all my questions. You did more than the right thing. You saved my life and gave me 2 families who love me. Robert stepped forward and shook Richard's hand. Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I couldn't. Robert, you were always her father. What happened was the result of difficult circumstances, not a lack of love. Jason and Brian also thanked Richard, and the whole family spent the afternoon talking about the years since they had been separated. Emma shared how she had become a music teacher for children with visual impairments, how she met her husband at an inclusive education conference, and their plans to open a specialized school in their town. You know, Mr. Richard, for a long time, I thought my story began when I was adopted. But now I understand it started here in this circus. With this family who loved me so much, they made the hardest decision of their lives to protect me. Emma's little girl, a bright 4-year-old named Susan, after the grandmother she never met, ran around the grounds asking questions about everything. Mummy, was this where you were born? Yes, sweetheart. This is where Grandma Susan and Grandpa Robert worked in the circus. Why isn't there a circus here anymore? Emma smiled and knelt to her daughter's level. Because sometimes families have to move to different places, but the love stays the same. Jason showed his niece the trailers where he and Brian had grown up, trying to explain what life in the circus was like. Robert, despite his age and health struggles, managed to perform some simple juggling tricks to amuse his granddaughter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. By the end of the afternoon, as everyone prepared to leave, Emma made a proposal that moved them all. How about we organize an annual gathering here, not to relive the past, but to celebrate the present and plan for the future? Robert smiled genuinely for the first time in many years. It would be an honor, my dear. And you're both invited too, Emma said, turning to Richard and Tyler. You're as much a part of this story as we are. Tyler smiled and glanced at his father, who nodded emotionally. It'll be a pleasure to be here. 2 years later, the annual gathering had become a tradition. The circus grounds were cleaned up and organized by Robert and his sons, who decided to turn it into a family memorial and a community space. Mrs. Margaret, now 75, had become the official keeper of the place's history. She welcomed visitors interested in learning about the Golden Star Circus and always ended her stories with the same phrase: families may sometimes break, but true love always finds a way to piece them back together. Tyler, now 20 and studying journalism, decided to write a book about the Johnson family's story. He interviewed everyone involved, collected photos and documents, and turned that chance discovery in the attic into a narrative about forgiveness, new beginnings, and the strength of family bonds. While writing the book one afternoon, Tyler reflected on how a simple curiosity had changed so many lives. His father had found the peace he'd been searching for years. The Johnson family had reunited in a way they never thought possible. And he himself had learned valuable lessons about the complexity of human relationships. Tyler's book was published 2 years later and became a local success. He donated all the profits to the special education school Emma had managed to open in her hometown. On the day of the book launch, the entire Johnson family was there, along with Richard, Mrs. Barbara, Mrs. Margaret, and many others who had been touched by the story over the years. Emma was invited to speak about the book and her journey. This book isn't about a circus that disappeared. It's about a family that got lost and found each other again. It's about imperfect people who made hard choices out of love, even when that love led them down painful paths. She paused and continued, "Sometimes we think families must be perfect to be real, but the truth is, real families are the ones that survive imperfections, mistakes, and separations." Robert, now 70 and physically frailer but with renewed spirit, also took the stage. "I spent years believing I'd failed as a father because I couldn't keep my family together. Now I understand that being a father isn't about keeping everyone physically close. It's about loving so deeply that you can let go when it's best for those you love." The event ended with a special performance. Jason and Brian, who had reconnected with their circus skills, put on a juggling act. Emma played the violin, a skill she'd developed in childhood. And little Susan, now 6, danced in a way that brought the entire audience to their feet with heartfelt applause. In the end, everyone gathered on stage, and Emma delivered a speech that stayed etched in the memory of all present. Family isn't just a place you come from. Family is a place you choose to return to, even when the path is long and complicated. After the event, the family gathered once more on the grounds of the old circus. This time, they set up a small tent in the center of the space and had a picnic under the stars. Tyler watched the scene with admiration. Seeing those people who had endured so much suffering, now reunited, laughing and sharing memories, was a powerful testament to the human capacity for healing and renewal. Richard approached his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Tyler, for having the courage to seek the truth." "Dad, I'm the one who learned so much from all this. I've realized that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones without conventional endings." "And what ending would you give our story?" Tyler smiled and looked around. Seeing Emma teaching her daughter to play a simple tune on the violin, Mr. Robert telling circus stories to his grandchildren, Jason and Brian playing like boys again, and Mrs. Margaret organizing the photos she'd collected over the years. "I'd say this story doesn't have an ending, Dad. It just transforms and keeps being written every day." That night, after everyone had gone home, Tyler returned alone to the grounds. He wanted a quiet moment to absorb everything he'd discovered and experienced over the past few years. Walking among the restored trailers and the space where the big top once stood, he could almost hear echoes of laughter, music, and applause that had once filled the place. But more than that, he could feel something even more important. The sense that even when families break, even when people make choices that pull them apart, true love has a strength of its own, one that always finds a way to bring hearts back together. Tyler pulled a notebook from his pocket and wrote his final thoughts on the story. "Today, I understood that the Johnson family never truly disappeared in 1992. They only separated physically so they could grow and learn the lessons they needed. When they reunited, they weren't the same people who had left, but the love between them had grown stronger and wiser." He closed the notebook and took one last look around the grounds. The next day, Robert would begin working on a new project, turning part of the space into a circus arts school for children in the local community, including children with disabilities. Emma had decided to move closer to her father to help manage the school. Jason and Brian had also made plans to spend more time in the area. Mrs. Margaret would be the honorary director of the project. It was as if the Golden Star Circus was being reborn, not as it once was, but as something new and better. Tyler walked to the exit and paused in front of a sign Robert had placed at the entrance. Golden Star Circus, Johnson Family Memorial. A place where love was lost and found again. Free entry for all who believe in the power of forgiveness. Smiling, Tyler boarded the bus home. During the ride, he reflected on how a simple discovery in the attic had changed his life, and so many others. When he arrived, he found his parents waiting with a cake and lit candles. "Surprise," Mrs. Barbara cheered. "Today marks 4 years since you found those documents." Tyler laughed and hugged them. Richard had prepared a special gift, a bound copy of all the original case documents, along with the new information they'd gathered over the years. "So, you never forget that sometimes the best discoveries happen when we have the courage to ask the right questions," said Richard. "And so you know how proud we are of the person you've become," added Mrs. Barbara. Tyler flipped through the file tenderly. On the last page, he found a letter he hadn't seen before. It was from Emma, written especially for him. "Tyler, when you began investigating our story, you didn't know you were about to give our family the greatest gift we could ever receive, the chance to find each other again. Your curiosity and determination turned a story of separation into one of reunion. Thank you for believing our story was worth telling and for having the courage to pursue the truth, even when it was painful. You taught us that sometimes we must look to the past to build a better future. With all the love in the world, Emma Johnson Taylor." Tyler felt his eyes fill with tears. In that moment, he understood he had found far more than just an interesting story in his attic. He had discovered a lesson about the importance of never giving up on the people we love, even when they seem lost forever. 5 years later, Tyler had graduated with a degree in journalism and was working as a reporter for a local newspaper. He had specialized in human interest stories, always searching for narratives that showed people's ability to overcome adversity and reinvent themselves. The Golden Star Circus Art School had become a regional landmark. Robert, despite his age, still taught occasional juggling and strength classes. Emma had developed a unique method for teaching music to visually impaired children, which was now being studied by universities across the country. Jason had become the school's administrator, and Brian oversaw the educational program. Mrs. Margaret, now in her 80s, still welcomed visitors interested in the family's history and had become something of an honorary grandmother to all the school's children. Little Susan, now 10 years old, was learning violin from her mother and already showed a natural talent for music. She had also started learning Braille, saying she wanted to be just like Mommy when I grow up. Richard had retired for good but found a new mission, helping other families facing difficult situations. He volunteered at a family mediation center, using his experience to help people find peaceful solutions to conflicts that could destroy relationships. One Sunday afternoon, while visiting the school, Tyler received a surprising phone call. "Tyler, this is American Cultural Productions. We'd like to talk to you about the rights to adapt the Johnson family's story into a television series." Tyler was momentarily speechless. "A television series?" "Yes. We read your book and think it would be perfect for a series we're developing about American families who've overcome great challenges. Would you be interested in consulting?" Tyler looked around the school, children playing in the courtyard, Emma teaching music, Robert telling stories, and thought of the entire journey that had begun with a simple discovery in the attic. "I'll need to speak with the Johnson family before I can answer. This isn't just my story." "Of course, we completely understand." It's exactly that sensitivity that drew us to the project. Tyler hung up and went to find Emma, who was teaching a group of children in the school's main hall. "Emma, can we talk when you finish class?" "Of course, Tyler. I'm almost done here." 15 minutes later, they were sitting on the school's porch watching the children play in the yard. "A production company wants to make a series about you," Tyler shared about the phone call. Emma was thoughtful for a moment. "What do you think, Tyler? Is it worth it?" Honestly, I think so, but not for fame or money. I believe your story could help other families going through similar situations. Families who think they're lost forever? Exactly. Families who believe some mistakes can't be fixed, that some separations are permanent. Emma smiled. Then let's do it, but with one condition. We want part of the earnings to go toward inclusive education projects across the country. I'm sure that can be arranged. That night, the entire Johnson family gathered to discuss the proposal. Robert, initially reluctant, was convinced by his children that sharing their story might truly help others. "If our pain can turn into hope for other families, then it's worth it," he finally said. The series was produced 2 years later and became a national success. The actors' sensitive performances and faithfulness to the real story moved millions of viewers across the country. The most remarkable part was the impact it had. Thousands of families separated by misunderstandings, pride, or old grudges reached out to one another after watching the episodes. Tyler received hundreds of letters from people sharing their own reconciliation stories. One stood out to him. "Tyler, my name is Patricia, and I'm 68. 15 years ago, I stopped speaking to my daughter over an argument about her marriage. After watching the series about the Johnson family, I realized I was missing the best years of my granddaughter's life because of my pride. I called my daughter yesterday, and we forgave each other. We're meeting next weekend. Thank you for telling this story. It helped me find my way back to my family." Reading letters like this, Tyler understood that his accidental discovery in the attic had turned into something far greater than he could have imagined. On the day of the series premiere, the entire Johnson family, along with Tyler, Richard, Mrs. Barbara, and Mrs. Margaret, gathered at the school to watch the first episode. The room was decorated with old circus photos and flowers picked from the garden Mrs. Margaret tended. When the series ended, everyone was emotional. Seeing their lives portrayed on television had been surreal, but deeply rewarding. Emma stood and raised a toast. "To all the families who've lost their way and haven't yet found each other, it's never too late to start over." Robert, now 75 and frailer but with eyes shining with joy, added, "And remember, family isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having enough love to forgive them and build something new from the broken pieces." Little Susan, now 12 and already a talented violinist, played a song she had composed especially for the occasion. The melody was both melancholic and hopeful, perfectly capturing the essence of the family's journey. When the music ended, they all embraced in a circle. Tyler looked around and saw faces marked by time and hardship, but also by wisdom and unconditional love. In that moment, he realized how privileged he was to be part of their story, not just as the curious young man who found the documents in the attic, but as someone who had learned invaluable lessons about forgiveness, family, and the human capacity to reinvent oneself. 2 years after the series aired, Tyler was married and expecting his first child. During a routine doctor's visit, he and his wife discovered their baby would be born with hearing loss. The couple's first reaction was fear and worry. But Tyler immediately remembered Emma's story and how she had turned her difference into strength. He sought out Emma to talk about the situation. "Tyler, your son will be perfectly capable of living a full and happy life," she said with conviction. "A disability doesn't define a person. What defines them is how their family welcomes and supports them. I'm afraid I won't know how to care for him properly. You have something many parents don't, the awareness that your child may be different, but not less. That's already half the battle." Emma offered to help Tyler and his wife prepare for the baby's arrival. She taught them about resources available for children with hearing loss, the importance of sign language, and how to adapt their home and family routine. When little Nathan was born, Tyler looked at that perfect baby and completely understood what Mr. Robert had felt upon discovering Emma's disability. A father's unconditional love doesn't diminish because of any difference. With Emma's help and the support of the extended family that had formed around the Circus's story, Tyler and his wife quickly adjusted to their new reality. Nathan grew up in an environment where his difference was seen as just another trait, not a problem. When Nathan turned 3, Tyler took him to visit the Golden Star Circus Art School. The boy was enchanted by everything he saw: the juggling lessons, the musical performances, the children playing together, regardless of their differences. Emma approached Nathan and began speaking to him in sign language. The boy responded excitedly, and Tyler's heart warmed, seeing his son communicate so naturally. "He's very bright," Emma said, "and very charismatic. I think he'd make a great little performer." "You think so?" "I'm sure of it. Would you like me to start teaching him some basics?" Tyler nodded, moved. Seeing his son accepted and encouraged by people who deeply understood the challenges he might face was an unexpected gift. By age 5, Nathan was already participating in small school performances. He had learned simple juggling routines and loved playing percussion instruments, feeling the vibrations through his body. During one of these performances, Tyler watched his son on the school's makeshift stage and reflected on how life moves in circles. He had discovered the story of a family torn apart by a child's disability, and years later there he was, watching his own son with a disability being celebrated and included. Mr. Robert, now 80 years old and walking with difficulty but still sharp and engaged, approached Tyler during the show. "Your boy has a natural talent for the stage," the older man said. "Thank you, Mr. Robert. You know, when I found out he'd be born with hearing loss, the first person I thought of was Emma. And now? Now I know he wasn't born with a limitation. He was born with a different way of experiencing the world, and that can be an advantage in many situations." Mr. Roberts smiled and placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "You've learned the lesson well, young man. It took me years to understand that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner at the school, a tradition they had developed, Mrs. Margaret, now 85 but still lively and engaged, made an announcement. "I have some news for you all." Everyone stopped eating and looked at her attentively. "I received a letter from City Hall today. They want to turn this land into a cultural heritage site for the city." The entire table erupted in exclamations of joy and surprise. "This means our school will be protected forever," explained Mrs. Margaret, "and the Johnson family's history will officially be preserved as part of the local history." Emma began to cry with emotion. "I never imagined our story would one day be considered important to others." "It always was," said Tyler. "You just didn't know it yet." Jason and Brian hugged, remembering the hard times when they thought they'd never be a family again. "Mom would be so proud," whispered Brian, referring to Susan, who hadn't lived to see the family reunited. "She is proud," said Robert with conviction. "I'm sure of it." The celebration lasted all night. Children from the school joined the party, along with parents, teachers, and community members who had become part of the extended family of the Golden Star Circus. Tyler watched the scene with gratitude. Nathan was playing with other children, communicating through a mix of sign language and creative gestures that all the kids seemed to understand perfectly. His wife chatted animatedly with Emma about inclusive education techniques. Richard and Mrs. Barbara helped Mrs. Margaret organize the old photos for the historical archive that would be created. It was impossible not to notice how that accidental discovery in the attic had turned into a web of relationships and opportunities that kept growing and touching new lives. Later that night, when almost everyone had left, Tyler found himself alone in the old ring with Robert. "Mr. Robert, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, son." "Do you regret anything? Any decision you made during those hard years?" Robert thought for a long moment before answering. "You know, Tyler, for many years I regretted not fighting harder to keep Emma with us when she was little, but now I see that every person in this family needed to walk their own path to get where we are today." He paused and continued. "If I had forced Susan to stay, maybe she'd never have found peace. If I'd stopped Emma's adoption, maybe she wouldn't have gotten the specialized education that made her the extraordinary person she is now. So you wouldn't change anything?" "I'd change the suffering we all went through, but the end result, no. We're a better family today than we were in 1992. Wiser, more understanding, more able to accept differences and challenges." Tyler nodded, understanding the depth of those words. "What about you, Tyler? if you could go back in time, would you still look for those documents in the attic? Without a doubt. That discovery changed my life in every possible way. It taught me about family, forgiveness, and the importance of never giving up on the people we love. And it gave you an extended family who'll care for your son for the rest of his life. Tyler smiled. That's the best part of the whole story. The two men stood in silence for a few minutes, watching the starry sky through the opening of the tent that covered the old ring. Mr. Robert, there's one more thing I want to tell you. What is it? My wife is pregnant again. We're having a girl. Robert turned to Tyler with shining eyes. What wonderful news. Have you picked a name yet? We want to name her Susan, in honor of Emma's mother and everything she meant in this story. Robert was moved and hugged Tyler tightly. She'd be deeply honored by that tribute. We hope our Susan grows up knowing this story and understanding that families sometimes have to weather storms to grow stronger. And she'll grow up surrounded by love, music, art, and acceptance. What better gift could a child receive? When Tyler Williams came home that night, he told his wife about the conversation with Robert and the decision to honor Susan Johnson. I think it's perfect, she said, and I have a surprise for you too. What surprise? I called the production company today. They want to make a documentary about the impact of the series on American families. They want to interview you and everyone who wrote letters, sharing how the story helped them. Tyler was surprised. Really? Really? I think your story still has so much to teach people. Our story, Tyler corrected. This was never just my story. 6 months later, Susan Williams was born, a healthy and bright baby who brought even more joy to the extended Golden Star Circus family. Emma was chosen as the girl's godmother, and Robert, deeply moved, agreed to be the honorary godfather. The documentary was released that same year and became a landmark in American television. It showed how a single family story had inspired thousands of reconciliations across the country. One of the most touching interviews was with a 70-year-old woman who had reconciled with her son after 20 years of separation. When I saw the series about the Johnson family, I realized I'd been too proud to take the first step. I called my son the next day and we apologized to each other. Now he visits me every weekend with my grandchildren, whom I barely knew. Another moving testimony came from a man who had decided to search for the daughter he'd given up for adoption decades earlier. Emma's story gave me the courage to try finding my daughter. I discovered she always knew she was adopted and wanted to meet me too. Now we have a wonderful relationship and she's made me a grandfather to 2 beautiful grandchildren. Watching the documentary at the school, surrounded by the entire Johnson family and dozens of children and adults who frequented the place, Tyler felt profoundly grateful for having followed his curiosity that day in the attic. Nathan, now 7, sat on his father's lap, watching the documentary through the vibrations and expressions of those around him. Little Susan, 1-year-old, slept peacefully in her mother's arms. "Daddy," Nathan signed, "why is everyone crying?" Tyler smiled and responded in sign language, "Because sometimes tears are from happiness, son. They're tears from people who found their families again. Like Grandpa Robert's family. Exactly like Grandpa Robert's family." Nathan nodded contentedly and went back to observing the reactions around him. Even without hearing the testimonies, he could sense the emotions through facial expressions and body language. When the documentary ended, Emma stood to give a final speech. "When I was a child and realized I was losing my sight, I thought my life was over. When I was given up for adoption, I believed I'd never be part of a real family again. But today, looking at everyone here, I see my family didn't shrink because of hardships. It grew." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. "All of you are my family now. The children who study here, the parents who trust us, the teachers who work with us, the friends who support us. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice, about love, about being there for life's important moments." Robert joined his daughter on the makeshift stage. 30 years ago, when our family fell apart, I thought I'd failed as a father. Today I see it might have been exactly what needed to happen for us to become the family we are now. a family that knows love is stronger than any obstacle. The audience applauded with emotion, and several children ran to hug Robert and Emma. Tyler watched the scene and understood he had witnessed something truly special. A family that had been completely broken, yet managed to rebuild itself in an even more beautiful and stronger way. That night before bed, Tyler wrote in his journal, "Today I realized our story isn't about a circus that disappeared in 1992. It's about the transformative power of forgiveness, the human ability to start over, and how true love always finds a way to overcome any obstacle. It's about how simple curiosity can change the course of many lives, and how the best discoveries are those that connect us to one another in ways we never imagined possible." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're following us from. If you have something to share, leave us a heartfelt comment. Do you believe families can always reconcile when there's true love? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories.